Chapter 15. The Disaster Within the Sunday. After Miss Bartlett's arrival was a glorious day, like most of the days of that year. And the wheeled autumn approached, breaking up the green monotony of summer, touching the parks with the gray bloom of mist, the beech trees with russet, the oak trees with gold. Up on the heights, battalions of black pines witnessed the change, themselves unchangeable. Either country was spanned by a cloudless sky, and either in arose the tinkle of church bells. The garden of Windy Corners was deserted, except for a red book, which lay sunning itself upon the gravel path. From the house came incoherent sounds, as of females preparing for work, and then say they won't go. I don't blame them, Minnie says. Need she go? Tell her. No nonsense. Anne, married. Put me behind. Dearest Lucia, may I trespass upon ye for a pin? For Miss Bartlett had announced that she, at all events, was one for church. The sun rose higher on its journey, guided not by Phaeton, but by Apollo, competent, unswerving, divine. Its rays fell on the ladies whenever they advanced towards the bedroom windows, on Mr. Beebe down at Summer Street, as he smiled over a letter from Miss Catherine Allen, on George Emerson cleaning his father's boots. The ladies move. Mr. Beebe moves. George moves, and movement may engender shadow. But this book lies motionless, to be caressed all the morning by the sun, and to raise its cover slightly, as though acknowledging the caress. Presently, Lucy steps out of the drawing-room window. Her new cerise dress has been a failure, and makes her look tawdry and wan. At her throat is a garnet brooch. On her finger, a ring set with rubies, an engagement ring. Her eyes are bent to the Weald. She frowns a little, not in anger, but as a brave child frowns when he is trying not to cry. In all that expanse, no human eye is looking at her, and she may frown unrebuked and measure the spaces that yet survive between Apollo and the western hills. Lucy! Lucy. What's that book? Has been taking a book out of the shelf and leaving it about to spoil. It's only the library book that Cecil's been reading. But pick it up, and don't stand idling there like a flamingo. Lucy picked up the book and glanced at the title listlessly. Anderologia. She no longer read novels herself, devoting all her spare time to solid literature and the hope of catching Cecil up. It was dreadful how little she knew, and even when she thought she knew a thing, like the Italian painters, she found she had forgotten it. Only this morning, she had confused Francesco Francia with Piero della Francesca, and Cecil had said, "What? You aren't forgetting your Italy already?" And this, too, had lent anxiety to her eyes when she saluted the dear view and the dear garden in the foreground, and above them, scarcely conceivable elsewhere, the dear sun. "Lucy, Have you a sixpence for Minnie and a shilling for yourself? She hastened in to her mother, who was rapidly working herself into a Sunday fluster. It's a special collection. I forget what for. I do beg no vulgar clinking in the plate with halfpennies. See that Minnie has a nice bite sixpence. Where is the child? Minnie! That book's all warped. Gracious, how plain you look. Put it under the atlas to press. Minnie. Oh, this is Honeychurch from the upper regions. Minnie, don't be late. Here comes the horse. It was always the horse, never the carriage. Where's Charlotte? Run up. Hurry her. Why is she so long? She had nothing to do. She never brings anything but blouses. Poor Charlotte. How I do detest blouses. Minnie. Paganism is infectious. More infectious than diphtheria or piety. And the rector's niece was taken to church protesting. As usual, she didn't see why. Why shouldn't she sit in the sun with the young men? The young men who had now appeared mocked her with ungenerous words. Mrs. Honeychurch defended orthodoxy, and in the midst of the confusion Miss Bartlett, dressed in the very height of the fashion, came strolling down the stairs. Dear Marian, I am very sorry, but I had no small change, nothing but sovereigns and half-crowns. Could anyone give me...
Yes. Easily.
Jump in. Gracious me, how smart you look. What a lovely frock. You put us all to shame. If I did not wear my best rags and tatters now, when should I wear them? Said Miss Bartlett reproachfully. She got into the victoria and placed herself with her back to the horse. The necessary roar ensued, and then they drove off. Goodbye! Be good, called out Cecil. Lucy bit her lip, for the tone was sneering. On the subject of church and so on, they had had rather unsatisfactory conversation. He had said that people ought to overhaul themselves, and she did not want to overhaul herself. She did not know it was done. Honest orthodoxy Cecil respected, but he always assumed that honesty is the result of a spiritual crisis. He could not imagine it as a natural birthright that might grow heavenward, like flowers. All that he said on this subject pained her, though he exuded tolerance from every pore. Somehow the Emersons were different. She saw the Emersons after church. There was a line of carriages down the road, and the Honeychurch vehicle happened to be opposite Sissy Villa. To save time, they walked over the green to it and found father and son smoking in the garden. Introduce me, said her mother. Unless the young man considers that he knows me already. He probably did, but Lucy ignored the sacred lake and introduced them formally. Old Mr. Emerson claimed her with much warmth, and said how glad he was that she was going to be married. She said yes, she was glad too. And then, as Miss Bartlett and Minnie were lingering behind with Mr. Beebe, she turned the conversation to a less disturbing topic, and asked him how he liked his new house. Very much, he replied, but there was a note of offense in his voice. She had never known him offended before. He added, "We find, though, that the Miss Allens were coming, and that we have turned them out. Women mind such a thing. I am very much upset about it. I believe that there was some misunderstanding," said Mrs. Honeychurch uneasily. "Our landlord was told that we should be a different type of person," said George, who seemed disposed to carry the matter further. "He thought we should be artistic. He's disappointed. And I wonder whether we ought to write to the Miss Allens and offer to give it up. What do you think?" He appealed to Lucy. "Oh, stop now, you have come," said Lucy lightly. She must avoid censuring Cecil, for it was on Cecil that the little episode turned, though his name was never mentioned. So George says, he says that the Miss Allens must go to the wall. Yet it does seem so unkind. There is only a certain amount of kindness in the world, said George, watching the sunlight flash on the panels of the passing carriages. Yes, exclaimed Mrs. Honeychurch. That's exactly what I say. Why all this twiddling and twaddling over two Miss Allens? There's a certain amount of kindness, just as there is a certain amount of light, he continued in measured tones. We cast a shadow on something wherever we stand, and it is no good moving from place to place to save things, because the shadow always follows. Choose a place where you won't do harm. Yes. Choose a place where you won't do very much harm, and stand in it for all you are worth, facing the sunshine. Well, Mr. Emerson, I see you're clever. I see you're going to be clever. I hope you didn't go behaving like that to poor Freddie. George's eyes laughed, and Lucy suspected that he and her mother would get on rather well. No, I didn't, he said. He behaved that way to me. It is his philosophy. Only he starts life with it. And I have tried the note of interrogation first. What do you mean? No, never mind what you mean. Don't explain. He looks forward to seeing you this afternoon. Do you play tennis? Do you mind tennis on Sunday? George minds tennis on Sunday. George, after his education, distinguished between Sunday. Very well. George doesn't mind tennis on Sunday. No more do I. That's settled. Mr. Emerson, if you could come with your son, we should be so pleased. He thanked her, but the walk sounded rather far. He can only potter about in these days. He turned to George, and then he wants to give up his house to the Miss Allens. I know, said George, and put his arm round his father's neck. The kindness that Mr. Beebe and Lucy had always known to exist in him came out suddenly, like sunlight touching a vast landscape, a touch of the morning sun. She remembered that in all his perversities, he had never spoken against affection. Miss Bartlett approached. "You know our cousin, Miss Bartlett," said Mrs. Honeychurch pleasantly. "You met her with my daughter in Florence." "Yes, indeed," said the old man, and made as if he would come out of the garden to meet the lady. Miss Bartlett promptly got into the Victoria. Thus, entrenched, she emitted a formal bow. It was the Pension Bertolini again, the dining table with the decanters of water and wine. There was the old battle of the room with the view. George did not respond to the bow. Like any boy, he blushed and was ashamed. He knew that the chaperone remembered. He said, I'll come up to tennis if I can manage it," and went into the house. Perhaps anything that he did would have pleased Lizzie, but his awkwardness went straight to her heart. Men were not gods after all, but as human and as clumsy as girls. Even men might suffer from unexplained desires and need help. To one of her upbringing and of her destination, the weakness of men was a truth unfamiliar, but she had surmised it at Florence, when George threw her photographs into the River Arno. "George don't go," cried his father, who thought it a great treat for people if his son would talk to them. "George has been in such good spirits today, and I am sure he will end by coming up this afternoon." Lucy caught her cousin's eye. Something in its mute appeal made her reckless. "Yes," she said, raising her voice, "I do hope he will." Then she went to the carriage and murmured, "The old man hasn't been told. I knew. It was all right." Mrs. Honeychurch followed her, and they drove away. Satisfactory that Mr. Emerson had not been told of the Florence escapade. Yet Lucy's spirits should not have leapt up as if she had sighted the ramparts of heaven. Satisfactory, yet surely she greeted it with disproportionate joy. All the way home, the horse's hoofs sang a tune to her. He has not told. He has not told. Her brain expanded the melody. He has not told his father, to whom he tells all things. It was not an exploit. He did not laugh at me when I had gone. He raised her hand to her cheek. He does not love me. No. How terrible if he did. But he has not told. He will not tell. She longed to shout the words, "That is all right. It's a secret between us two forever. Cecil will never hear." She was even glad that Miss Bartlett had made her promise secrecy. That last dark evening at Florence, when they had knelt packing in his room, the secret, big or little, was guarded. Only 3 English people knew of it in the world. Thus she interpreted her joy. She greeted Cecil with unusual radiance because she felt so safe. As he helped her out of the carriage, she said, "The Emersons have been so nice. George Emerson has improved enormously. How are my proteges? Asked Cecil, who took no real interest in them and had long since forgotten his resolution to bring them to Windy Corner for educational purposes. Proteges, she exclaimed with some warmth. For the only relationship which Cecil conceived was feudal, that of protector and protected. He had no glimpse of the comradeship after which the girl's soul yearned. You shall see for yourself how your proteges are. George Emerson is coming up this afternoon. He is a most interesting man to talk to. Only don't. She nearly said, don't protect him. But the bell was ringing for lunch, and as often happened, Cecil had paid no great attention to her remarks. Charm, not argument, was to be her forte. Lunch was a cheerful meal. Generally, Lucy was depressed at meals. Someone had to be soothed, either Cecil or Miss Bartlett or a being not visible to the mortal eye, a being who whispered to her soul, "It will not last, this cheerfulness. In January, you must go to London to entertain the grandchildren of celebrated men." But today she felt she had received a guarantee. Her mother would always sit there. Her brother here, the sun, though it had moved a little since the morning, would never be hidden behind the western hills. For the luncheon they asked her to play, she had seen Gluck's Armide that year, and played from memory the music of the Enchanted Garden, the music to which Renaud approaches, beneath the light of an eternal dawn, the music that never gains, never wanes. Such music is not for the piano, and her audience began to get rested, and Cecil, sharing the discontent, called out, "Now play us the other garden," for one in Parsifal. She closed the instrument. "Not very dutiful," said her mother's voice. Fearing that she had offended Cecil, she turned quickly round. There George was. He had crept in without interrupting her. "Oh, I had no idea," she exclaimed, getting very red. And then, without a word of greeting, she reopened the piano. Cecil should have the Parsifal, and anything else that he liked. "Our performer has changed her mind," said Miss Bartlett, perhaps implying she will play the music to Mr. Emerson. Lucy did not know what to do, nor even what she wanted to do. She played a few bars of the Flower Maiden's song very badly, and then she stopped. "I vote tennis," said Freddie, disgusted at the scrappy entertainment. "Yes, so do I." Once more she closed the unfortunate piano. "I vote you have a men's four." "All right." Not for me, thank you," said Cecil. "I will not spoil the set." He never realized that it may be an act of kindness in a bad player to make up a fourth. "Oh, come along, Cecil." "I'm bad. Ford's rotten. And so I dare say Emerson." George corrected him. "I am not bad." One looked down one's nose at this. Then Certainly, I won't play, said Cecil, while Miss Bartlett, under the impression that she was snubbing George, added, I agree with you, Mr. Vyse. You had much better not play. Much better not. But Minnie, rushing in where Cecil feared to tread, announced that she would play. I shall miss every ball. Anyway, so what does it matter? But Sunday intervened and stamped heavily upon the kindly suggestion. Then it will have to be Lucy, said Mrs. Honeychurch. You must fall back on Lucy. There is no other way out of it. Lucy, go and change your frock. Lucy's Sabbath was generally of this amphibious nature. She kept it without hypocrisy in the morning, and broke it without reluctance in the afternoon. As she changed her frock, she wondered whether Cecil was sneering at her. Really, she must overhaul herself and settle everything up before she married him. So Mr. Floyd was her partner. She liked music, but how much better tennis seemed. How much better to run about in comfortable clothes than to sit at the piano and feel girt under the arms. Once more music appeared to her, the employment of a child. George served and surprised her by his anxiety to win. She remembered how he had sighed among the tombs at Santa Croce because things wouldn't fit. How after the death of that obscure Italian, he had leant over the parapet by the Arno and said to her, I shall want to live, I tell you. He wanted to live now, to win at tennis, to stand for all he was worth in the sun which had begun to decline and was shining in her eyes. And he did win. Ah, how beautiful the Weald looked. The hills stood out above its radiance, as Fiesole stands above the Tuscan plain, and the South Downs, if one chose, or the mountains of Carrara. She might be forgetting her Italy, but she was noticing more things in her England. One could play a new game with the view, and try to find in its innumerable folds some town or village that would do for Florence. Ah, how beautiful the Weald looked! But now Cecil claimed her. He chanced to be in a lucid, critical mood, and would not sympathize with exaltation. He had been rather a nuisance, all through the tennis. For the novel that he was reading was so bad that he was obliged to read it aloud to others. He would stroll round the precincts of the court and call out, I say, listen to this, Lucy. 3. Split infinitives. Dreadful, said Lucy, and missed her stroke. When they had finished their set, he still went on reading. There was some murder scene, and really, everyone must listen to it. Freddie and Mr. Floyd were obliged to hunt for a lost ball in the laurels, but the other two acquiesced. The scene is laid in Florence. What fun. Cecil? Read away. Come, Mr. Emerson, sit down after all your energy. She had forgiven George, as she put it, and she made a point of being pleasant to him. He jumped over the net and sat down at her feet, asking, You, and are you tired? Of course I'm not. Do you mind being beaten? She was going to answer no, when it struck her that she did mind, so she answered yes. She added merrily, I don't see you're such a splendid player, though. The light was behind you, and it was in my eyes. And never said I was. Why, you did. You didn't attend. You said, oh, don't go in for accuracy at this house. We all exaggerate. And we get very angry with people who don't. The scene is laid in Florence, repeated Cecil, with an upward note. Lucy recollected herself. Sunset, Leonora was speeding. Lucy interrupted. Leonora? Is Leonora the heroine? Who's the book by? Joseph, Sunset. Leonora, speeding across the square, prayed the saint she might not arrive too late. Sunset, the sunset of Italy. Under Orcagna's loggia. The Loggia de Lanzi, as we sometimes call it now. Lucy burst into laughter. Joseph, Emery, prank, indeed. See why it's Miss Lavish. It's Miss Lavish's novel, and she's publishing it under somebody else's name. Who may Miss Lavish be? Ah, a dreadful person. Miss Emerson, you remember Miss Lavish? Excited by her pleasant afternoon, she clapped her hands. George looked up. Of course I do. I saw her the day I arrived at Summer Street. It was she who told me that you lived here. Weren't you pleased? She meant to see Miss Lavish. But when he bent down to the grass without replying, it struck her that she could mean something else. She watched his head, which was almost resting against her knee, and she thought that the ears were reddening. No wonder the novel's bad, she added. I never liked Miss Lavish, but I suppose one ought to read it as one's met her. All modern books are bad, said Cecil, who was annoyed at her inattention, and vented his annoyance on literature. Everyone writes for money in these days. Oh, Cecil, it is so. I will inflict Joseph Emery Plank on you no longer. Cecil, this afternoon seems such a twittering sparrow. The ups and downs in his voice were noticeable, but they did not affect her. She had dwelt amongst melody and movement, and her nerves refused to answer to the clang of his. Leaving him to be annoyed, she gazed at the black head again. She did not want to stroke it, but she saw herself wanting to stroke it. The sensation was curious. How do you like this view of ours, Mr. Emerson? I never notice much difference in views. What do you mean? Because they're all alike. Because all that matters in them is distance and air. Hum, said Cecil, uncertain whether the remark was striking or not. My father, he looked up at her and he was a little flushed. Says that there is only one perfect view. The view of the skies fade over our heads, and that all these views on earth are but bungled copies of it. I expect your father has been reading Dante, said Cecil, fingering the novel, which alone permitted him to lead the conversation. He told us another day that views are really crowds of trees and houses and hills, and are bound to resemble each other like human crowds, and that the power they have over us is sometimes supernatural for the same. Lucy's lips parted. For a crowd is more than the people who make it up. Something gets added to it, no one knows how, just as something has got added to those hills. He pointed with his racket to the South Downs. What a splendid idea. And so you can say, I shall enjoy hearing your father talk again. And so sorry, he's not so well. No, he isn't well. There's an absurd account of a view in this book, said Cecil. Also that men fall into two classes, those who forget views and those who remember them, even in small rooms. Mr. Emerson, have you any brothers or sisters? None. Why? You spoke of us. My mother, I was meaning. Cecil closed the novel with a bang. Oh, Cecil, how you made me jump. I will inflict Joseph Emery prank on you no longer. I can just remember us all three going into the country for the day and seeing as far as Hindhead. It is the first thing that I remember. Cecil got up. The man was ill-bred. He hadn't put on his coat after tennis. He didn't do. He would have strolled away if Lucy had not stopped him. Cecil, do read the thing about the U. Not while Mr. Emerson is here to entertain us. No. Read away. I think nothing's funnier than to hear silly things read out loud. If Mr. Emerson thinks us frivolous, he can go. This struck Cecil as settled and pleased him. It put their visitor in the position of a prig, somewhat mollified. He sat down again. Mr. Emerson, go and find tennis balls. She opened the book. Cecil must have his reading and anything else that he liked. But her attention wandered to George's mother, who, according to Mr. Eager, had been murdered in the sight of God, and according to her son, had seen as far as Hindhead. Am I really to go? Asked George. No, of course not really, she answered. Chapter 2, said Cecil, yawning. Find me chapter 2, if it isn't bothering you. Chapter 2 was found, and she glanced at its opening sentences. She thought she had gone mad. Here, hand me the book. She heard her voice saying, it isn't worth reading. It's too silly to read. I never saw such rubbish. It oughtn't to be allowed to be printed. He took the book from her. Leonora, he read, sat pensive and alone. Before her lay the rich champaign of Tuscany, dotted over with many a smiling village. The season was spring. Miss Lavish knew somehow and had printed the past in draggled prose for Cecil to read and for George to hear. A golden haze, he read. He read, afar off the towers of Florence, while the bank on which she sat was carpeted with violets. All unobserved Antonio stole up behind her. Lest Cecil should see her face, he turned to George and saw his face. He read. There came from his lips no wordy protestation, such as formal lovers use. No eloquence was his, nor did he suffer from the lack of it. He simply enfolded her in his manly arms. This isn't the passage I wanted. He informed them there is another much funnier, further on. He turned over the leaves. Should we go into tea? Said Lucy, whose voice remained steady. She led the way up the garden, Cecil following her. George last. She thought a disaster was averted. But when they entered the shrubbery, it came. The book, as if it had not worked mischief enough, had been forgotten, and Cecil must go back for it. And George, who loved passionately, must blunder against her in the narrow path. No, she gasped, and for the second time was kissed by him. As if no more was possible, he slipped back. Cecil rejoined her. They reached the upper lawn, alone. Chapter 16. Line to George that Lucy had developed since the spring. That is to say, she was now better able to stifle the emotions of which the conventions in the world disapproved. Though the danger was greater, she was not shaken by deep sobs. She said to Cecil, I am not coming into tea. Tell mother, I must write some letters, and went up to her room. Then she prepared for action. Love felt and returned, love which our bodies exact and our hearts have transfigured. Love, which is the most real thing that we shall ever meet, reappeared now as the world's enemy, and she must stifle. She sent for Miss Bartlett. The contest lay not between love and duty. Perhaps there never is such a contest. It lay between the real and the pretended, and Lucy's first aim was to defeat herself. As her brain clouded over, as the memory of the views grew dim and the words of the book died away, she returned to her old shibboleth of navs. She conquered her breakdown. Tampering with the truth, she forgot that the truth had ever been. Remembering that she was engaged to Cecil, she compelled herself to confuse remembrances in George. He was nothing to her. He never had been anything. He had behaved abominably. He had never encouraged him. The armor of falsehood is subtly wrought out of darkness, and hides a man not only from others, but from his own soul. In a few moments, Lucy was equipped for battle. Something too awful has happened. She began as soon as her cousin arrived. Do you know anything about Miss Lavish's novel? Miss Bartlett looked surprised and said that she had not read the book, nor known that it was published. Eleanor was a reticent woman at heart. There is a scene in it. The hero and heroine make love. Do you know about that? Dear, you know about it, please. She repeated, they're on a hillside, and Florence is in the distance. This, my good Lucia, I am all at sea. I know nothing about it. Whatever. There are violets. I cannot believe it is a coincidence. Charlotte, Charlotte, how could you have told her? I have thought before speaking. It must be you. Told her what? She asked with growing agitation. About that dreadful afternoon in February. Miss Bartlett was genuinely moved. Oh, Lucy, dearest girl, she hasn't put that in her book? Lucy nodded. Not so that one could recognize it. Yes. And never, never, never more shall Eleanor Lavish be a friend of mine. So you did tell. I did just happen when I had tea with her at Rome in the course of conversation. But Charlotte, what about the promise you gave me when we were packing? Why did you tell Miss Lavish when you wouldn't even let me tell Mother? I will never forgive Eleanor. She has betrayed my confidence. Why did you tell her, though? This is a most serious thing. Why does anyone tell anything? The question is eternal, and it was not surprising that Miss Bartlett should only sigh faintly in response. She had done wrong. She admitted it. She only hoped that she had not done harm. She had told Eleanor in the strictest confidence. Lucy stamped with irritation. Cecil happened to read out the passage aloud to me and to Mr. Emerson. It upset Mr. Emerson, and he insulted me again. Behind Cecil's back. Is it possible that men are such brutes? Behind Cecil's back as we were walking up the garden. Miss Bartlett burst into self-accusations and regrets. What is to be done now? Can you tell me? Oh, Lucy, I shall never forgive myself, never to my dying day. Fancy, if your prospects? I know, said Lucy, wincing at the word. I see now why you wanted me to tell Cecil, and what you meant by some other source. You knew that you had told Miss Lavish, and that she was not reliable. There was Miss Bartlett's turn to wince. However, said the girl, despising her cousin's shiftiness, what's done's done. You have put me in a most awkward position. How am I to get out of it? Miss Bartlett could not think. The days of her energy were over. She was a visitor, not a chaperone, and a discredited visitor at that. She stood with clasped hands while the girl worked herself into the necessary rage. That man must have such a setting down that he won't forget. And who's to give it him? I can't tell, Mother, now, owing to you. nor Cecil. Charlotte, owing to you. I am caught up every way. I think I shall go mad. I have no one to help me. That's why I've sent for you. I have job. What it's wanted is a man with a whip. Miss Bartlett agreed. One wanted a man with a whip. Yes, but it's no good agreeing. But what's to be done? We women go maundering on. What does a girl do when she comes across a cad? I always said he was a cad, dear. Give me credit for that, at all events. From the very first moment when he said his father was having a bath. Oh, bother the credit. And who's been right or wrong? We've both made a muddle of it. George Emerson is still down the garden there. And is he to be left unpunished? Or isn't he? I want to know. Miss Bartlett was absolutely helpless. Her own exposure had unnerved her, and thoughts were colliding painfully in her brain. She moved feebly to the window and tried to detect the cad's white flannels among the laurels. You were ready enough at the Bertolini when you rushed me off to Rome. Can't you speak again to him now? Willingly would I move. Heaven and earth. I want something more definite, said Lucy contemptuously. Will you speak to him? It's the least you can do. Surely. Considering it all happened because you broke your word. Never again shall Eleanor Lavish be a friend of mine. Really, Charlotte was outdoing herself. Yes or no? Please. Yes or no? It is the kind of thing that only a gentleman can settle. George Emerson was coming up the garden with a tennis ball in his hand. Very well, said Lucy, with an angry gesture. No one will help me. I will speak to him. Myself. And immediately she realized that this was what her cousin had intended all along. Hello, Emerson, called Freddie from below. Found the lost ball. Good man. Want any tea? And there was an eruption from the house onto the terrace. Oh, Lucy, but that is brave of you. I admire. They had gathered round George, who beckoned, she felt, over the rubbish, the sloppy thoughts, the furtive yearnings that were beginning to cumber her soul. Her anger faded at the sight of him. Ah, the Emersons were fine people or no end. She had to subdue a rush in her blood before saying, Freddie has taken him into the dining room. The others are going down the garden. Come, let us get this over quickly. Come. I want you in the room, of course. Lucy, do you mind doing it? How can you ask such a ridiculous question? Poor Lucy. She stretched out her hand. I seem to bring nothing but misfortune wherever I go. Lucy nodded. She remembered their last evening at Florence, the packing, the candle, the shadow of Miss Bartlett's toque on the door. She was not to be tracked by pathos a second time. Eluding her cousin's caress, she led the way downstairs. Try the jam? Freddie was saying. The jam's jolly dead. George, looking big and disheveled, was pacing up and down the dining room. As she entered, he stopped and said, "No, nothing to eat." "You go down to the others," said Lucy. "Charlotte and I will give Mr. Emerson all he wants." "Where's mother?" She started on her Sunday writing. "She's in the drawing room." "That's all right. You go away." He went off singing. Lucy sat down at the table. Miss Bartlett, who was thoroughly frightened, took up a book and pretended to read. She would not be drawn into an elaborate speech. She just said, "I can't have it, Mr. Emerson. I cannot even talk to you. Go out of this house and never come into it again, as long as I live here," flushing as she spoke and pointing to the door. "I hate a row. Go, please." "What?" "No discussion." "But I can't." She shook her head. "Go, please. I do not want to call in Mr. Weiss." "You don't mean," he said, absolutely ignoring Miss Bartlett. "You don't mean that you're going to marry that man?" The line was unexpected. She shrugged her shoulders as if his vulgarity wearied her. For me, what was it, is the violent. She helped her to sign me. "You are merely ridiculous," she said quietly. Then his words rose gravely over hers. "You cannot live with Weiss. And he's only for an acquaintance. He is for society and cultivated talk. He should know no one intimately, least of all a woman." It was a new light on Cecil's character. "Have you ever talked to Weiss without feeling tired?" "I can scarcely discuss." "No. But have you ever?" "He is the sort who are all right so long as they keep to things, books, pictures, but kill, and they come to people. That's why I'll speak out through all this muddle even now. It's shocking enough to lose you in any case, but generally a man must deny himself joy. And I would have held back if your Cecil had been a different person. I would never have let myself go. But I saw him first in the National Gallery, when he winced because my father mispronounced the names of great painters. Then he brings us here, and we find it is to play some silly trick on a kind neighbor. That is the man all over, playing tricks on people, on the most sacred form of life that he can find. Next, I meet you together and find him protecting and teaching you and your mother to be shocked when it was for you to settle whether you were shocked or no. It's Cecil all over again. He daren't let a woman decide. He's the type. He's kept Europe back for 1,000 years. Every moment of his life, he's forming you, telling you what's charming or amusing or ladylike, telling you what a man thinks womanly, and you of all women, and listen to his voice instead of to your own. So, it was at the rectory when I met you both again. So has been the whole of this afternoon. Therefore, not. Therefore, I kissed you. Because the book made me do that, and I wish to goodness I had more self-control. I'm not ashamed. I don't apologize. But it has frightened you, and you may not have noticed that I love you. Or would you have told me to go and dealt with a tremendous thing so lightly? But therefore I settled to fight him. Um, Lucy thought of a very good remark. You say Mr. V's wants me to listen to him, Mr. Emerson. Pardon me for suggesting that you have caught the habit. And he took the shoddy reproof and touched it into immortality. He said, yes, I have. He sank down as if suddenly weary. I'm the same kind of brute at bottom. This desire to govern a woman, it lies very deep, and men and women must fight it together before they shall enter the garden. But I do love you, surely, in a better way than he does. He thought, yes, really in a better way. I want you to have your own thoughts, even when I hold you in my arms. So he stretched them towards her. Lucy, well, be quick. There's no time for us to talk now. Come to me as you came in the spring, and afterwards I will be gentle and explain. I have cared for you since that man died. I cannot live without you. No good, I thought. She is marrying someone else. But I meet you again when all the world is glorious water and sun. As you came through the wood, I saw that nothing else mattered. I called. I wanted to live and have my chance of joy. And Mr. Weiss, said Lucy, who kept commendably calm, does he not matter that I love Cecil and shall be his wife shortly? A detail of no importance, I suppose. But he stretched his arms over the table towards her. May I ask what you intend to gain by this exhibition? He said, it is our last chance. I shall do all that I can. And as if he had done all else, he turned to Miss Bartlett, who sat like some portent against the skies of the evening. You wouldn't stop us this second time if you understood, he said. What? I have been into the dark, and I am going back into it, unless you will try to understand. Her long, narrow head drove backwards and forwards, as though demolishing some invisible obstacle. She did not answer. It is being young, he said quietly, picking up his racket from the floor and preparing to go. It's being certain that Lucy cares for me, really. It is that love and youth matter intellectually. In silence, the two women watched him. His last remark, they knew, was nonsense. But was he going after it or not? Would not he, the cad, the charlatan, attempt a more dramatic finish? No. He was apparently content. He left them, carefully closing the front door, and when they looked through the hall window, they saw him go up the drive, and begin to climb the slopes of withered fern behind the house. Their tongues were loosed, and they burst into stealthy rejoicings. "Oh, Yuchie, come back here? Oh, what an awful man." Lucy had no reaction. At least, not yet. "Well, he amuses me," she said. "Either I'm mad, or else he is, and I'm inclined to think it's the latter. One more fuss through with your shower?" "Many thanks. I think, though, that this is the last. My admirer will hardly trouble me again." And Miss Bartlett, too, essayed de roguish. "Well, it isn't everyone who could boast such a conquest, dearest, is it?" "Oh, one oughtn't to laugh, really. It might have been very serious. But you were so sensible and brave, so unlike the girls of my dole. Let's go down to them." But once in the open air, he paused. Some emotion, pity, terror, love, but the emotion was strong, seized her, and she was aware of autumn. Summer was ending. In the evening brought her odors of decay, the more pathetic because they were reminiscent of spring. That something or other nattered intellectually. A leaf, violently agitated, danced past her, while other leaves lay motionless. But the earth was hastening to re-enter darkness, and the shadows of those trees over Windy Corner. "Hello, Lucy. There's still leg enough for another set if you two will hurry. Mr. Emerson has had to go. What a nuisance. That spoils the four." And I say, "Cecil, do play, do. There's a good chap. There's a good... It's Floyd's last day. Do play tennis with us, just this once." Cecil's voice came. "My dear Freddie, I am no athlete. As you well remarked this very morning, there are some chaps who are no good for anything but books. I plead guilty to being such a chap, and will not inflict myself on you." The scales fell from Lucy's eyes. How had she stood Cecil for a moment? He was absolutely intolerable. And the same evening, she broke off her engagement. Chapter 17. Lying to Cecil. He was bewildered. He had nothing to say. He was not even angry, but stood, with a glass of whiskey between his hands, trying to think what had led her to such a conclusion. She had chosen the moment before bed, when, in accordance with their bourgeois habit, she always dispensed drinks to the men. Freddie and Mr. Floyd were sure to retire with their glasses, while Cecil invariably lingered, sipping at his while she looked at the sideboard. "I am very sorry about it," she said. "I have carefully thought things over. We are too different. I must ask you to release me, and try to forget that there ever was such a foolish girl." It was a suitable speech, but she was more angry than sorry, and her voice showed it. Um, Different. How How I haven't had a really good education for one thing. She continued still on her knees by the sideboard. Um, my Italian trip came too late, and I'm forgetting all that I learnt there. I shall never be able to talk to your friends. I'll behave as a wife of yours should. I don't understand you. You aren't like yourself. You're tired, Lucy. Tired, she retorted, kindling at once. That is exactly like you. You always think women don't mean what they say. Well, you sound tired, as if something has worried you. What if I do? Doesn't prevent me from realizing the truth. I can't marry you, and you will thank me for saying so someday. You had that bad headache yesterday, all right? For she had exclaimed indignantly. I see it's much more than headaches. Give me a moment's time. He closed his eyes. You must excuse me if I say stupid things, but my brain has gone to pieces. Part of it lives 3 minutes back, when I was sure that you loved me, and the other part, I find it difficult. I'm likely to say the wrong thing. It struck her that he was not behaving so badly, and her noted guarantees and her irritation increased. She again desired a struggle, not a discussion. To bring on the crisis, she said, there are days when one sees clearly, and this is one of them. Things must come to a breaking point sometime, and it happens to be today. If you want to know, quite a little thing decided me to speak to you when you wouldn't play tennis with Freddie. I never do play tennis, said Cecil, painfully bewildered. I never could play. I don't understand a word you say. You can play well enough to make up a 4. I thought it abominably selfish of you. No, I can't. Well, never mind the tennis. Why couldn't you? Couldn't you have warned me if you felt anything wrong? You talked of our wedding at lunch. At least, you let me talk. I knew you wouldn't understand, said Lucy quite crosser. I might have known there would have been these dreadful explanations. Of course, it isn't the tennis. That was only the last straw to all I've been feeling for weeks. Surely it was better not to speak until I felt certain. She developed this position. Often before I have wondered if I was fitted for your wife, for instance, in London. And are you fitted to be my husband? I don't think so. You don't like Freddie, nor my mother. There was always a lot against our engagement, Cecil, but all of our relations seemed pleased, and we met so often, and it was no good mentioning it until all things came to a point. They have today. I see clearly. I must speak. That's all. I cannot think you were right, said Cecil gently. I cannot tell why, but though all that you say sounds true, I feel that you are not treating me fairly. It's all too horrible. What's the good of a scene? No good. But surely I have a right to hear a little more. He put down his glass and opened the window. From where she knelt, jangling her keys, she could see a slit of darkness, and, peering into it, as if it would tell him that little more, his long, thoughtful face. Don't open the window, and you better draw the curtain too. Freddie or anyone might be outside. He obeyed. I really think we had better go to bed, if you don't mind. So, I shall only say things that will make me unhappy afterwards. As you say, it's all too horrible, and it's no good talking. But to Cecil, now that he was about to lose her, she seemed each moment more desirable. He looked at her instead of through her for the first time since they were engaged. From a Leonardo, she had become a living woman with mysteries and forces of her own, with qualities that even eluded art. As Breen recovered from the shock, and in a burst of genuine devotion, he cried, "But I love you, and I did think you loved me." "I did not," she said. "I thought I did at first. I am sorry, and ought to have refused you this last time, too." He began to walk up and down the room, and she grew more and more vexed at his dignified behavior. She had counted on his being petty. It would have made things easier for her. By a cruel irony, she was drawing out all that was finest in his disposition. "You don't love me, evidently." "I dare say that you are right not to. But it would hurt a little less if I knew why." Because a phrase came to her and she accepted it. "You're the sort who can't know anyone intimately." A horrified look came into his eyes. "I don't mean exactly that. But you will question me, though I beg you not to, and I must say something. It is that, more or less. When we were only acquaintances, you let me be myself. But now you're always protecting me." Her voice swelled. "I won't be protected. I will choose for myself what is ladylike and right. To shield me is an insult. Can I be trusted to face the truth? But I must get it second-hand through you. A woman's place. You despise my mother, I know you do, because she's conventional and bothers over puddings, but oh, goodness. And you wrap yourself up in art and books and music, and would try to wrap up me. I won't be stifled, not by the most glorious music. For people are more glorious, and you hide them from me. That's why I break off my engagement. You were all right, as long as you kept to things. But when you came to people..." She stopped. There was a pause. Then Cecil said, with great emotion, "It is true." "True on the whole," she corrected, full of some vague shame. "True, every word. It is a revelation. It is odd. Anyhow, those are my reasons for not being your wife." he repeated. The sort that can know no one intimately. It is true. I fell to pieces the very first day we were engaged. I behaved like a cad to Beatty and to your brother. You are even greater than I thought. She withdrew a step. I'm not going to worry you. You're far too good to me. I shall never forget your insight. And dear, I only blame you for this. You might have warned me in the early stages, before you felt you wouldn't marry me, and so have given me a chance to improve. I have never known you to this evening. I've just used you as a peg for my silly notions of what a woman should be. But this evening, you are a different person. You thoughts, even a new voice. What do you mean by a new voice? He asked, seized with incontrollable anger. I mean that a new person seems speaking through you, said he. Then she lost her balance. She cried, if you think I'm in love with someone else, you are very much mistaken. Of course, I don't think that. You're not that kind, Lucy. Oh, yes, you do think it. It's your old idea. The idea that has kept Europe back. I mean, the idea that women are always thinking of men. If a girl breaks off her engagement, everyone says, oh, she had someone else in her mind. She hopes to get someone else. It's disgusting, brutal. As if a girl can't break it off for the sake of freedom. He answered reverently.
I may have said that in the past.
I shall never say it again. You have taught me better. She began to redden and pretended to examine the windows again. Of course, there's no question of someone else in this. No jilting or any such nauseous stupidity. I beg your pardon most humbly if my words suggested that there was. I only meant that there was a force in me that I hadn't known of up till now. All right, Cecil? That will do. Don't apologize to me. It was my mistake. It is a question between ideals, yours and mine. Pure abstract ideals, and yours are the nobler. I was bound up in the old vicious notions, and all the time you were splendid and new. His voice broke. I must actually thank you for what you have done, for showing me what I really am. Solemnly, I thank you for showing me a true woman. Will you shake hands? Of course I will, said Lucy, twisting up her other hand in the curtains. Good night, Cecil. Goodbye. That's all right. Most, I'm sorry about it. Next, thank you very much for your gentleness. We light your candle shower. They went into the hall. Thank you. Good night again. God bless you, Lucy. Goodbye, Cecil. She watched him steal upstairs, while the shadows from 3 banisters passed over her face like the beat of wings. Just on the landing, he paused strong in his renunciation and gave her a look of memorable beauty. For all his culture, Cecil was an ascetic at heart, and nothing in his love became him like the leaving of it. She could never marry. In the tumult of her soul that stood firm, Cecil believed in her. She must someday believe in herself. She must be one of the women whom she had praised so eloquently, who care for liberty and not for men. She must forget that George loved her, that George had been thinking through her and gained her this honorable release, that George had gone away into what was it? She put out a lamp. It did not to think, nor, for the matter of that, to feel. She gave up trying to understand herself and joined the vast armies of the benighted, who follow neither the heart nor the brain, and march to their destiny by catchwords. The armies are full of pleasant and pious folk, but they have yielded to the only enemy that matters, the enemy within. Water, if sinned against passion and truth, and vain will be their strife after virtue as the years pass. They are censured. Their pleasantry and their piety show cracks. Their wit becomes cynicism, their unselfishness hypocrisy. They feel and produce discomfort wherever they go. They've sinned against Eros and against Pallas Athene, and not by any heavenly intervention, but by the ordinary course of nature. Those allied deities will be avenged. Lucy entered this army when she pretended to George that she did not love him, and pretended to Cecil that she loved no one. The night received her as it had received Miss Bartlett 30 years before. Consider